Suvrat, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Ganesh. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time. I know it's we've been trying to do it what like 3 or 4 weeks now or more, and finally I'm glad we actually could make this work.
Absolutely.
Um, so you know the story. This is the a show about AI and stories in AI, capturing thoughts and inspiration from leaders like you who have been in the trenches, practicing it, making this, putting AI to work, so that we can share those stories to inspire more action and more people to get engaged. Right. So why don't we start with your personal story? Right. Tell us about how you got into data and AI. Talk to us about your career and your life in general.
Sure. Look, after my engineering, I just happened to find myself working for a global bank. And this is late 90s, mid 90s, for a global bank in Mumbai, India. And my first job put me in the kind of, very close to how much data matters in terms of, I remember we were doing something for a pretty large global bank, entire ATM network, etc. And the information flow, security, things which are still very relevant, but relevant then as well. So you think about, from that point onwards, data has only become not only more and more uh, important in terms of our customers, our clients, our employees' ability to look at the digital information flow and to tap into it and to make use of it. But equally importantly, I always remind myself and everyone that the capabilities to handle that and process that has have also kept pace with that. So it's not just we are flooded with challenges and problems and data volumes. We also have a lot of capabilities which have come out thanks to a tremendous amount of innovation in this space. So this has been an endless journey, right? Like, data has been my first passion, is still continues to be that passion and direction. And I just, without realizing, I turned it into not only a specialization, but something which I can then add tremendous value to enterprises, because information flows are still very complex. So that's what put me into data. And frankly, AI is really just another application on top of data, right? And it's a very diversified application on top of data. Like we can get into that, the different mechanisms you can deploy. But the good part of that is that it just fast tracks certain things because of the advancements in the technology. Just fast tracks certain things which used to take a lot more time, right? So at the end of the day, it's an optimization process. And I think people sometimes forget that it's not some wonderland, and we'll talk about that as well. Like the biggest challenges which organizations face is exactly because sometimes perceived as the fantastic, it's not, right? It's a pretty, if you take the time to explain and to engage, it's really an optimization process. And I think that's, I believe, has been tremendous to the industry in many shapes.
Awesome. And in your career, right, you worked in multiple Fortune 500 organizations, right, and different roles, but everything from in and around data and turning data into insights and business value, right? What is that? What does the chief data officer role in a large global Fortune 50 organization look like? What does that look like?
Yeah, look, it's definitely not uh, a one cast where everyone can just say, hey, look, I'm just going to mold myself here, right? It's not that. Because if you think about traditionally, people, like for decades, right, people have been performing certain processes which turned into systems, which is now producing a lot of information. And then we have had our IT partners, right, to put those systems in place and to process that information. I think what has changed is that in every case, the information has become hyper specialized. So if you look at the complexity of any function in any large scale enterprise, those functions are handling a lot of complexity and hence a lot of information which gets produced by virtue of it. And what a CDO job becomes, and it sounds very complex, but the fact is the CDOs, the core responsibility they have is to understand all those information sets produced by these specialized complex functions and bring it all together with the help of both the stakeholders in terms of what adds value and our IT partners in terms of how we process it towards very well defined business outcomes, right? This is a role of CDO should not be confused in my mind with any other role which had already existed in the organization. You should not hire a CDO as in an enterprise to tackle things which belong to a function or which belongs to technology. You should really define the role of CDO to bring that leadership and the horizontal view of information, and to help the organization both on the value side as well as kind of whoever needs to enable that in bringing it all together. And I feel that that is the real value of CDO adds. Now, that shapes itself in different forms in every enterprise, because where you start and the priorities which dictate the hiring of the CDO differs, right? Initially, I've seen a lot of that becomes more regulatory and transparency and quality. But to be honest, that's great. That's great that because it's really bringing a lot more auditability and reliability into the information you were producing and how you're using it. But that the role should not stop there, right? The role should look into that as enablers towards that bigger value creation, which leads to P&L impact. So yes, there is a cost optimization and risk reduction, right? So we always look at CDO role in those three in those three dimensions, and everything in the organization should tie across those three dimensions. Is it a cost reduction? Is it a risk reduction or risk management, or is it really P&L and incremental revenue? And I think a CDO should look at everything they do in terms of those three dimensions, right? The priorities will differ, the timeframes will differ, but they should keep all those three dimensions in their mind for everything they do.
Got it. No, it's actually interesting you say that. Like, one is the CDO function shouldn't be just another siloed function. It's all about how do I really bring out the value that's residual within information, and specifically information silos. Because earlier you said what has really become more prevalent now is the complexity of the processes that are generating this data asset, information assets, and how do you really get value out of it, right? How do you create incremental value for the business? And I like the way you said that, but almost everything else you do in terms of quality, ensuring governance, reducing risk, should be in the service of that end goal of trying to get to that point. That's beautiful. I want to tap into your earlier premise on data. I mean, AI and data. AI is just another application on top of data, right? We've seen in the industry the value realization in this round of AI and data-driven machine learning for organizations of all size has been actually relatively low, unless you're a Facebook or a Netflix or Amazon who has all the data, has all the users, and have that direct impact. General business applications, there's a lot of value being generated, but then general value creation to the amount of effort put in has been relatively low.
Yep.
Why is that the case? Is it because the science is still new in this space, like machine learning is still new, there's a lot more capability building that's happening that eventually will pay out? Or is it just we are approaching it, we are overcomplicating it?
I don't think we're overcomplicating it. My experience has been that, look, when we take examples of companies like Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, they are 100% digitally native companies, right? Let's compare it with a bank, right? Let's compare it with an asset manager. I've worked for buy side for almost 15 years. Most of the relationships and the conversations are still happening in person, right? Think about an institutional salesperson who will talk to an institutional consultant, who in turn talks to the institution clients. And there is a hyper specialization in that. There is a corporate segment, sovereign segment, right? And those conversations are fundamentally different in terms of the information which is being exchanged as touch points versus a digital touch point. Like, you are interacting with Amazon digitally. So they can capture everything you're doing in terms of what you're navigating, what product you looked at versus what product you purchase, and everything they help you with in these engines, right? Like, you purchase this, other people purchase these products as well. Or if you like this, this is all based on digital touch points, which in many industries we still lack, number one, right? And that also goes to the value proposition. If you talk to an institutional salesperson, they will say, look, if I start to just send email communication to my clients who are very used to me explaining these products and really customizing the solutions for complex clients, it's not going to work. We're not there yet, right? It's a slow progress towards. And wherever you see low-hanging fruits, they are being immediately applied, right? So you see you and I both use now retail banking apps. We don't go to banks to talk to a teller for basic things, right? I mean, we can handle that, deposit checks, etc. So low hanging fruits, very quick to adopt. More advanced stuff takes time. And by the way, let's not forget the scanning of a check through a phone has AI built into it, right? There are models created to see this number is 2 and this number is 5, and where does the account number appear, where does the routing number appear. These are all well trained models, and my point is they are being applied where it's applicable to them. Yeah. So it's not too complex, but I do want to also come to this point of, if you think about digitally native firms, right? They are hiring. I mean, they of course have global operations, they have sales, finance, every function. But if you really look at the people who are creating that engine, these are people who understand fundamentally coding, right? They understand the outputs created by coding. So there is not a big distance between people who are trying to understand the outcome from the people who are producing that, right? It's relatively narrow. If you go to banks and if you're not taking the time to bring that close, and what I mean by that is you have, let's say, a bunch of data scientists sitting there producing all kinds of models, but those models and the outputs are irrelevant unless it's well understood by the user. And especially in regulated industries, it's even more important for people to understand how it was done, right? And I think that's what we are forgetting, that you can't just produce the outcome in a new way when your majority of the organization is still trying to understand the process and trust it and believe in it, right? I mean, we have issues in these organizations just on relying on the information. Now, if I apply a deep learning model to it and produce some hypothetical, theoretical answer in terms of this is what the math is telling me, it's not going to work because the person has to apply it and in that commit their self and their entire image in front of their clients based on something they don't understand. That's never going to happen, right? So I think we need to narrow it down. We have to reduce that gap and really start to operate in that form where the people who are really responsible to apply and make decisions fully understand the process of how those outcomes are being produced.
It's very, very fascinating you mentioned that, because there's two sides. There's two things that I hear too, right? One is examples like Amazon and stuff, where you have the distance between the math and science versus the outcome, so it's very visible, they can really see. So the context of the math, the context of the data is well understood by the person who's playing with it, right?
Yeah.
And you can argue in a lot of firms we are trying to make that easier, for like giving access. You have a business owner, a product owner sitting with the data science team to help them have visibility. But the flip of this, what was interesting to me when you said that, wherein, look, you're giving me all these outcomes and saying, hey, here is a best way to generate extra alpha, and here's the strategy. But then that person sitting on the other end, who is corresponding with another human on the other end, doesn't understand the context in which this should be applied. Why is it actually a better strategy than others? So there's a reverse education that also needs. So one is visibility or observability for the technical teams to how their work affects the outcome. Yep. And then the other thing is the folks who are closer to the outcome have to have the understanding of the entire lineage of thought, absolutely, if you will, right?
Absolutely. What got into it? Have you taken care of all the risks which this decision may lead to? How will we explain it to all the auditors? How will we explain it to regulators? Most importantly, how will we explain it to our clients, right? And, I mean, think about it, Ganesh, right? The industry in investment industry has been talking about quantamentals, which is just another way of saying, let's bring quantitative methods closer to fundamental understanding, right? For 2 decades. And it just has never worked, right? Because you can't just term something fancy and believe that it will come close naturally. You have to take the time to explain those outputs. Or, like, there are companies like famous hedge funds, without going into the names, whose founders are PhDs in mathematics and physics and understand the output produced by that model is worth putting it in the market and investing in it. That's what Amazon is, right? In every industry, there is an example where the business decision maker fully understands and appreciates the production, right? And wherever that happens, you can apply it. But then there is a huge set of industries and companies, and because we're talking about generations here, let's say there are 3 generations working in a firm at any given point. Do they understand, right, Finally, you're going to hold someone accountable for it, but do they understand the entire factory, the production? Can they look at it and ask very intelligent and smart questions? And I think unless we invest in that, it's not going to magically happen by producing some, as we call it, fantastic outputs. And it works in things which are easily understandable. Like I can produce something in an NLP model, and I have the text side by side, right? So I can read the text, I can read the production of the model. Okay, I get it. You're doing summarization, you're doing topic models, right? It's quick, it's comprehension, yeah. But with math, it changes everything, right? So I think if I can't explain to people a value factor, which we have been generating for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years in the investment industry, which came from underlying 20 factors, let's say, just hypothetically, maybe 50, it's hard, right? If I haven't been able to sell that as an alpha signal, it's very hard to take it to the next level and say, let's apply AI to it.
Understood. No, it's actually I had a gentleman by the name Laszlo Sranger. He's an ex hedge fund trader, followed by he was actually worked on Candy Crush Saga, so two very different industries. But and he had this notion, and he's in this mission of re-educating data scientists. So he made an argument on one of the shows saying, on one of the episodes saying, ML ops is so broken because you're trying to actually make everybody play team sports, right? And but if you look at historic hedge funds, what they did very well is give the ownership back to the person who is building
Absolutely.
the product, right? And so it's a similar argument what you're making, right? Saying there is like those hedge funds who have the ability where they have the end-to-end sight from what business outcomes they're driving and have control over it, and they're applying science and math to that problem. They're able to generate that alpha more visibly than someone else who have to now educate and go through this process.
Absolutely. I mean, look, this is a very good example where historically, what did people do? They put the quants, right, next to the strat guys, right? So the strat guys and girls, they're sitting there, they're basically making trading decisions, and these people are working for them to produce those models iteratively, refining it. Because remember, markets are merciless. So, it will prove itself within seconds, right? It's not something you have to sit and wait for to say, hey, what will happen. So all those elements are important: proximity, knowledge share, quick testing, validation, fine tuning based on the results. In markets, the whole loop happens so fast that it was very quick for people to say, you know what, I'm going to put all this talent together in a small desk of 3 people, 5 people, right? Let them execute that strategy the way they execute it best, and I will measure it at every tip. What's the performance, right? What did you do today? At every end of day, as you and I know, traders have a P&L. It gets published, right? I mean, it's obvious, it's transparent. And I think that's what drives adoption, right? Proximity and accountability of joint decisions. We are not there yet in every industry model. But if we get there, which we are, I mean, and we can talk about success stories we have seen, it all comes down to that proximity and accountability, right? And I think if we really like not approach this as a central, specialized skill sitting somewhere producing something, I think we already have taken a pretty big step forward.
No, there's so much to unpack there. No, you're so right, and I have a fundamental argument against the whole centralization movement that's happening in AI today across all industries, right? And which is exactly this, because you're separating subject matter expertise and also in some cases, like unlike in trading where you have your feedback loop is instant, right? But in some of the other industries, it takes too long. So now when you're separating the outcomes and action from the work you're doing, it causes that it causes that the lack of value realization in the process, right? So let me go to the other side of this, right? So what are some of the examples that we've been able to generate alpha in your specific industry, asset management, using machine learning and AI, right? Give me some examples, give me some stories there.
Yeah. So look, I think it's a stretch to say in an investment management, because I haven't worked recently for a hedge fund which is deploying these techniques immediately into the market. This is that proprietary trading desk concept we just talked about. Most of the asset managers I have worked for are committed to the long-term interests of the client portfolio, right? So I wouldn't say that, an alpha is being produced through AI, right? That's a stretch. What I would say is that the research process has been augmented
through the use of these capabilities. And we have always treated that, and I've found tremendous success in that, when you treat that as an yet another way of looking at the research. So let me give you a perfect example, right? I work for UBS. We have a very famous practice in our sell site called Evidence Lab. An Evidence Lab is specialized in saying that, look, given the vast amount of alternative data which is available in the market, right? Not processing it and not producing unique insights through it, it's actually, you mean you're not doing, if you really are number one in the research, then you're not fulfilling your job responsibilities. It's almost saying you're neglecting information which is sitting out there, right? So they embrace that challenge and say, okay, so we're going to look at it, but they also took the discipline of continuing with the valuation based approach, along with publishing any alternative signals they could really test. And there was a very disciplined process for running that test for 3 months before analysts even looks at it, right? So analysts can ask a question, the team goes, collects the data, runs the hypothesis, runs it, right? For 3 quarters sometimes run it. So they were ready to make that investment because they didn't want their analysts to be in the, in the shoes which we just talked about, where like, what did we publish, right? I mean, they need to trust it. So 3 quarters maybe like was something they decided can be 2, can be 4, right? But point is, they still at the end of the day published it as an alternative hypothesis. They didn't change their fundamental research view based on valuation, right? So that's a great example of augmenting the research process and working in the best interest of the clients to give them the best what's available. If you translate that to buy side, which is exactly how we have applied it, there's a team of people within investments. So everything I'll say, we'll start to check the box of, okay, proximity, great. Knowledge of investments, great, right? So the team is in investments, reporting to the head of investments. This is not like some central team sitting somewhere. Then we partnered with them to develop the capabilities, which includes people, ability to bring the data, processing engines, distributed architectures. There's a whole slew of that for another time, right? But the capability development, and then finally they take that, run it, look at it, and then present that to a committee of individuals who are taking interest in this. And they have a very open way of welcoming ideas, similar to the first example I gave on the sell side, and translating those ideas into, look, what data will be needed, can we do some model, can we try something, and then presenting the hypothesis back to the team. And they debate it, and only if it looks like it's meaningful to produce on a systematic basis, they ask us to then productionize, right? So in that whole process, even if you're generating a one-time idea, because remember, not every idea is relevant in every market situation. So it might be relevant today, you produce it, you generate some insights, that's still useful. And the person who requested it, let's say from fixed income desk or from, China or whatever, can still say that, look, I think this was useful, but I don't see the need of repeating it. I'm satisfied. Or don't repeat it because I'm not sure it's adding too much new information for me, right? Can be any outcome. The whole idea is open that debate, get the questions, hunt for what information is available to further augment the information people already have, and then debate it, right? Have an intellectual debate on it. And I think that process is working great. And that, in my view, has added tremendous amount of new way of thinking, right? People are thinking in idea generation. People are thinking in where the hypothesis is presented to back to them. There is no like this attachment to production, right? Like sometimes I hear that, oh, because you're producing it, you want it to kind of somehow work. That's not the idea here. Like it's like reading 10 research reports. Do you get attached to the 9th research report? You don't. And that's how I look at it. Look, it's the 11th research report, right? It's just supposed to add to what you already know. And if it's not adding meaningful information, discard it. And that whole thing is working quite well. And I think UBS has done a very good job in implementing that whole proximity part, subject matter expertise. That team then partnering with us then partnering with IT. They're like these concentric overlapping circles, right? We work as a team because we know there are multiple forms of spatialization needed to get there.
Interesting. So the other thing, it's fascinating, those examples. The other thing you're also saying, what you're not saying, but I can infer from, is just tools alone that actually automates the operations part of it where you have the separation of concerns, and I'm going to just give you a collaborative landscape to do ML ops, where you can bring in IT, bring in data science, bring in the business owners, everything together, is alone not going to solve this problem, right? You still need that proximity and the shared accountability to go. So it's truly a team sport from that perspective. Now, what are some of the, and you mentioned something that is interesting. I want to click a little bit deeper on the production, attachment to production, right? So there is the general notion that everybody agrees that, look, there is experimentation with machine learning happens. And, in the cases you said, I'm generating ideas for, either better research insights or alpha or something. I don't need to really productionize it. I'm just trying different things. So in effect, that's equivalent to just experimentation, right? But some of the value that you can really get out of machine learning or machine learning data products are when you really put it in practice as a part of a business process itself, right? Have there been attempts made in your leadership trying to do that? What has been your lessons there? So the whole idea of the productionizing AI or ML or industrializing. So give me some examples.
Yeah, I think, this is another actually myth, because nothing applies universally, Ganesh, right? So I read at one point the difference between, and this is whether it's literal or not, but I like it, right? The difference between complicated and complex. The complicated is a machinery with, let's say, 100,000 parts, right? But the interaction between those parts is understood. It's just hard to define it, right? There are so many moving parts. If you think about the application of AI in industrials, right? Windmills, Tesla, all these are industrial applications, right? They have done a good job in saying there are many moving parts, but we know how they work. And based on that working, let's apply AI. Then there is an environment called complex, where there are same 100,000 parts, but the interactions among them are not known. Okay, markets are complex. So for anyone to say, I can productionize a ML model for markets, look, there are many smart people out there, but what they're essentially doing is they're narrowing the space. So if you look at time series models on stock price, they work well when you're applying it for the next second. You are hyper shrinking the complexity because you're hyper shrinking the environment in which you're operating, right? One stock, 1 second in a given day, when you already know the overall market movement, right? And I think that's what people miss out on, that you can apply you can productionize models to the extent you can commit to. Remember our first dialogue of take responsibility and commitment to the consistent production of the results. How can you, when your feature set is changing? When your feature set is changing at a like infinite rate, this is global now, right? I mean, we are not even operating in arbitrage. Like, okay, the markets are not known and someone is running with a register to price it and sending you a telegram at the end of the month. I get that word, right? But in today's world, I get shocked when people say that. Now, and I think so it goes back to, if you understand the discipline quite well, then you will understand what I am defining as complexity versus complication, complicated versus complex. And I'm pretty sure there are better ways of defining it, but that's how I like to define it. That look, if you understand the interactions and you understand the variables in the play and they behave largely in the same way with each other, go ahead. It's like weather. For anyone who claims I will always predict weather with 100% accuracy for United States, okay, good luck, right? But can I predict that weather for, like for your home, given the conditions historically? Maybe, yeah. I mean, and there are apps I have seen which are very accurate for a very small region, rather like you're here and this is what's going to happen. I think it's very similar. So productionization of the models makes sense. We are doing that in some spaces. We have applied that for climate portfolios, sustainability. They make sense, but they are mostly like things which have been tried and tested before, right? Like if you are trying to predict the probability of a company complying with the Paris Agreement, if the country has signed up for it, the country has a carbon profile, if it has enough trends, if you understand the business it operates in, if you understand the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of that company, if you have enough data and it changes slowly, by nature of these things will change slowly, you can predict it. Yeah. right? Apply Bayesian to it. You have the prior, you know what the forward-looking time frame is. Go ahead, be crazy. But I think environments where those whole things changing very fast, right? Imagine everything is changing. The company's operating in a model where every emission and what they're signing up for, how the product is produced, how it's sold, how it's used keeps changing. I mean, don't productionize it. I mean, run it, test it, right? Produce some insights out of it, but don't say I'm going to productionize it and sit back and hope for consistent results.
No, exactly. It's a you like the example you gave for stock prices or even weather for that matter, right? When you compress the time frame, you remove the dimensions of the data in the future, right?
Yep.
And you're so the closer you are to shorter time frame, you can do it. But the whole idea about can I do this once and forget about it and let it go run on its own? Yeah, you're not going to have the right results. You may still have results, but then it'll be changing. That brings me to the question on data itself, right? So the role of data and the data information architecture, if you will, and practices that are needed to ensure successful AI implementations. What are your thoughts on that?
Huge. I mean, this is like, I always laugh at it. Everything we talked about just now are what the AI call it feature vector, right? So let's say your feature vector is made up of, let's just make it a real thing, right? Let's make it 200 features, not a million features, 200 features. I mean, you walk into any organization and say, hey, an average person, right? Do you use 200 data points being produced in your organization? And yeah, I kind of do, right? Do you trust all of them? Any smart person will say, I have never measured them to tell you that answer. Right? I mean, I get like, you can see I'm smiling because for me, it's like, okay, guys, so you're going to use something and you're going to put it to use for the first time. You have never measured it. Forget managing it, right? You were looking at it in a hyper-spatialized manner, something got produced. Let's take a setup of a product, right? Or even better, right? Let's take, a trade gets executed. You're interested in the P&L of it. You do something with it. You produce the P&L of that trade. You call it a day, right? It kind of sits in your book for regulatory and audit purposes, but that's it. Now, let's say you start to take all those characteristics, which you never bothered. You were just interested in the P&L outcome. You got it. Now you're taking all the characteristics the trader entered in the system for that trade, and you want to turn it into a feature vector somehow. That's insane. Like, you didn't even tell the person who was coding that trade, I'm going to use it for a completely different outcome. Can I trust it? So I think data is quintessential, but what I'm getting to is just collecting that data is useless because you have to go all the way to, I may use this information in a new way. By the way, I'm not just using 3 attributes. I'm going to use all attributes ever coded for this particular data entity. Can I trust it? Go ask that question, right? And the people who are authoring it will say, whoa, like, what do you mean? What are you going to do with it, right? Where are you publishing it? What outcome will I be held accountable for? So I think it's extremely important to be disciplined about it. Like, generate the awareness, tell people how you're going to use it, go back to the drawing board and say, who's taking the responsibility for it? Like, this whole data governance framework is not just about, oh, you're running around, there are owners. No, it's ownership of what? It comes down to data point. In successful implementations, we have seen where people start to really understand the usage and then still go back and say, I can't commit to 100% of it. I can commit to the 40% of what's most critical. You have heard in the industry, critical data points, right? Critical data elements or key data elements. It's nothing but a subset of information which you want to use in a certain way. You make the authors of it aware. You highlight a sense of responsibility and accountability, and then you help them by measuring it. Deploy quality, deploy cataloging, right? Give it a business meaning. All that takes time, Ganesh. And most of the organizations want to skip that and say, right, let's jump to the outcome. Or worst case, people think that stuff is boring. How can it be boring? That's going to ensure everything you're going to do at the end. So I find this whole question fascinating, right? Because I've lived through so much of it. But goes back to my point, if you're not taking the time to explain this, you can't sit back and say people should understand it. So data plays a huge role, but the preparation of that data, putting the governance, the ownership, explaining the importance of it, measuring it, helping people, right? Like, if I tell you something you're coding and help you, hey, look, it's going to be used somewhere. Here are the metrics you can see if something is wrong. Then here are the workflows to escalate if it has aged or it hasn't been resolved. And by the way, it goes to your manager, right? Just to inform them. And at some point, by the way, in our firm, it goes to the board. right? So, but if you have to make it transparent, you have to go through that workflow. Certain things are now, right? Should never go wrong. Price of a stock, right? Didn't come in now. I need it now. Like, what do you mean by like I sit on it for escalation? But then there are certain things like a characteristic for a certain product, or going something is being published on some report going to a customer. Yeah, you can make sure you measure it, highlight it. Now the same information then becomes useful for an AI model or a quant model or a report, right? But it's the all the steps you need to take to get to that point where you can trust it and you can understand it, right? So we simply say, if you have trust and transparency in your information, go ahead. If not, please take the time to do it.
Understood. No, thank you, Suvrat. I think it's your point, like, how can this be boring, right? It's just data. You have to solve this, and it's probably the most critical thing to do.
Yeah.
I had Daniel Hernandez, IBM Watson's GM, on the call the other day, on the show the other day, and he was telling me this whole new effort that he's actually trying to tell people, right? Look, it is just a data problem. You're just still trying to solve a value creation problem from the data that you have.
Yeah.
Treat it as such, right? So it's like, make AI boring. And his point was like, no, it's not. It's the data that's interesting. Make
Yeah.
AI boring, right? So we joked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, so that what is one thing that you would, if you have to make a call to innovators around the world to focus on, what's that one thing you would say to drive the adoption of these frontier technologies and make it useful for everybody? What would that call to action be?
Look, I think that's a bit presumptuous if I want to make one call, but I can tell you from my own experience, the call or the realization which helped most, right? And I think we talked about this a little bit, that, we talked about the CDO role, but essentially a data and AI leader's responsibility is really a delicate balance between capability development and engagement. So capability is the teams, the talent, the technology, the architectures, the platforms, the process capabilities, right? Engagement is the knowledge share, understanding and appreciation of the business, what they do, how they use it, sitting down with them, understanding that, engaging them, telling them what you're going to do, what you're going to produce, how trustworthy it is, how should they be engaged, how should they be trained. The leader's job is to bring it together, but to bring it together constantly, right? And in my experience, if you get too busy because of the complexity of one, or because you're more inclined to do one, let's say you're more social, you talk, you engage, you put together plans, and the team is like, who's going to bring this together, right? Like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to have the IT architectures, distributed architectures? I mean, I hear both sides of it, right? And then there are data science teams super frustrated about our business community doesn't get it. Well, of course, because you haven't made the time to explain what you're doing, and rather you should have explained that before you did something, right? So where I have had setbacks is where the pendulum swung too hard, either because there was too much complexity I was trying to deal with on one side, right, or because I just it slipped from my radar. And remember, a small team within the business views, right, can be, if you neglect to attend to that, it's on you. So find the right model. So what we do is like, look, it's impossible for a leader to engage every individual as well as do the capability development. Find the partners on both sides. Sit down together on both, like, okay, you want a business partner to be the spokesperson for the business. And if you like, there are things written about it. I remember AT&T did that, right? They made a joint ownership of this whole practice when they started to look at AI and all these advanced analytics. They got a capability leader and an organization leader, and they made them jointly responsible, right? AT&T University and the whole employee transition, and training them to understand the new methods. It became their joint responsibility, right? So for organizations who have done it right, there are books written about that. And I think so. It's not something you need to have an aha moment about. It's well published. It's difficult finding those partnerships and explaining to people. Take it slow, right? No one is asking you to prove that deep learning works in your organization. But I think what they're going to absolutely blame you for is when you do something which has no business application. So I think that's one thing I would say, whether you are on the innovator on some very scientific method side, or you're a real innovator, because innovation happens in so many forms. Let's say you're an innovator in terms of you want to change the business model, you want to create a new revenue line, you want to launch a new product, you want to go into a new market. All that is innovation. You have to do constant translation, right? And wherever you find yourself because of whatever constraints that you oriented too hard towards one side, right? It's impossible that it will be easy for you to just kind of say, oh yeah, let's move on, right? You have to go back then and cover that space.
So find that balance, between capability development and translating slash, working with the business to realize value, right? Communicate, realize value, and so forth.
Yep.
Now, this has been fascinating. I think we touched upon a lot of different things, and I have 2 or 3 standard questions I asked. But before that, what else should I be asking you? What should I have asked you that I haven't asked yet?
No, it's been a great conversation, Dinesh. I think, look, this just keeps it very real, and I hope I've shared like my experience in doing a lot of that. I think for me, the fundamental focus on the data part, on organizational awareness part, and partnership and engagement part. I think those are the key ingredients if you want to do this, and then find the right partners, because you're not going to be able to do it all. So just make sure that you're really working in a collaborative and partnership based model.
No, I think Suvrat, I must say that this has probably been a really very grounded and real conversation. Right now, we touched upon so many things, which really your experience and your background really shows, and you've also done a really good job of just translating all that complexity and abstracting the complexity out, and then making it very, very easily digestible as nuggets to how do I go as an organizational leader think about embarking on my data and AI journey. So now I have some kind of frameworks that I can catch out of this conversation to go apply, right? So let me go to my couple of 2 standard questions for you. One is, since it's a show on AI, artificial general intelligence, robots taking over and stuff. Do you believe in that? Do you fear that? Do you think we'll see it during our lifetime?
Look, with where we are, even the robots are taking over in very narrow spaces, right? And you know that. Like, narrow spaces means optimization, isn't it? It's a predictable, repeatable thing which you want a robot to do, right? I mean, my friend always talks about, because they got a new dog and they have like that one of those vacuums, Roomba or whatever, they got. I mean, that's great. They map it out. It's exciting to map it with the kids. He did that, and now he just cleans the hair. It's awesome. The floors are not dirty. It's not as narrow, right? Those things have taken years to really get to that point where they can recognize the boundaries, the rooms, that you can create a map and it can follow that map. That didn't happen in one day, right? So that's an example of things take time. We start with a very narrow to like even something which is pure optimization, that you're not running around with a sweeper, right? It took years to get there, right? And that's still just, I would say, still pretty basic application, right? Which is, from a scientific perspective, is very impressive to get there, right? So I think on one end, I get excited about seeing developments like that. But I also keep myself very grounded and real around, yes, it's sweeping the floor. Awesome, right? I mean, let's take another example, which was super inspiring, which is, our veterans, when they're coming back, and there is tremendous amount of innovation going on now on, especially like really, really, really sad life outcomes of amputees, and how you're able to let them feel things with an artificial arm, right? That makes me emotional, right? Makes me teary, that science can bring something so human to you, right? It's no longer a robot, right? It's part of your body now. And you feel like, oh, if it was not there, how will I get that life back, right? So, look, I am always very excited about this. If it's managed well, it's done with the right ethical outcome, is tested, and there is a discipline and the integrity behind like how it's applied, it's all good. I'm just, unless I see it and start to see a lot of that happening in a broader space, anything taking over anything, it's like human beings can't take over anything. Like, forget robots. Like, after whatever, millions of years, of the entire evolution, it's not like something can take over something, right? It's like, I think that is a long, long way to go if it is to go. And I think, look, you and I won't be here to see it as far as I can see. So my point is, I support that innovation. I support real applications. I support, like, again, that example of that arm is the best example of human touch in AI. Everything you're doing, just keep that real, keep that useful. I think that if it progresses, it becomes some supernova thing, so be it. But I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think AI, or in general any technology, the whole purpose of it, and I don't think anybody should lose sight of it, is to improve and enhance the human experience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's why we started this to begin with. So, one personal question is, what is one practice that you do daily or regularly that keeps you at the top of your game?
Well, there's a big assumption that I keep myself at the top of my game. It's just always trying. Uh, I don't know, Ganesh. I think part of it is just years of experience. I think I reached there, by the way, after a long time. So I would be lying as if like this was day one after years. But you reach at a point in life where, whether it's your own shortcomings or certain behaviors which lead to bad outcomes, right? You start to smile when you start to go down that road, and you get to reset yourself when you do that. I do that more and more every day now, right? But that didn't happen, that happens out of tremendous humility at some point in your life, where you see, like, okay, you're forced into that zone, right? Because we are all driven by early days, this so-called the cliche of type A personality, and go 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 go, and let's drive the best thing, and that's what I think. So all the conversation we're having about keeping it real, it starts with you, right? And I think for me, that's the only practice I really hope never leaves me, because it was hard attained. And everything else then which comes with it, your how you get there, whether you meditate, whether you talk to people, you have advisors, you have a partner who is ready to critique, you have kids. I mean, I'm blessed with kids who will critique me on at the point, right? They don't hesitate. I mean, you just need to be surrounded by personal professional circle who keep you humble, right? And then you start to practice that on a daily basis, which helps a lot. I mean, everything we talked about is just appreciation of the complexity and how you want to attend to it. That is extremely important to me. I mean, frankly, has produced the best results for my both personal happiness and professional success. So I hope I continue to do that. I hope I continue to be surrounded by those healthy critiques and all that. So it's been great.
No, it's awesome, Surat. No, what a genuine answer, and I think what you're really saying is, like, this is fascinating for me in so many different ways, and we've talked about this in the past
Yeah.
too, right? Which is, early in your career, when you're in a different mindset, you're trying to actually, even if you find shortcomings, there is a lack of acceptance. You're trying to work on it or work against it
Yeah.
and compensate for it, and then you get to a state where a mental state rather, it's nothing to do with age or anything, where you just get into this level of self-awareness and comfort in
Yeah.
knowing that things are that's a do, right? I mean, it's like it is the way it is, and you should
Yeah.
actually be just accepting it, right? So
Yeah.
no, a lot of gems and lessons there. So this has been fascinating, great conversation,
Yeah.
everything AI and data to touching upon personal practices and spirituality. This has
Yeah.
been awesome. How can the viewers and listeners get in touch with you on the internet?
Oh, I mean, look, it's very easy. I'm generally fairly active. LinkedIn, you can find me. I'm blessed with a fairly unique name, thanks to my parents. I'm pretty sure there are many of me even with my name, but you can easily find me. Just reach out. I'm always here. Like, always love to connect. Always love to help. Right. So to the extent I can, I would. But yeah, most importantly, look, I am as keen to connect, learn, and share ideas. So it's not like I'm doing any favor to anyone. Just feel free to reach out. Like, you and I are connecting, right? I mean, this has been a lot of fun for me personally. Thanks for organizing it. It's a great conversation. So I would continue to welcome such interactions.
Brad, thank you, Suvrat. Thanks a lot for jumping on the show. This has been a blast.
Yeah, same here. Thanks.